Professor in Human Geography here, Associate in Humanities. It gives me great honour today to welcome you to this, the annual Brian Robson lecture. I'm sure many of you knew Brian Robson. Many have heard of Brian Robson. For those who haven't, Brian Robson was Emeritus Professor of Geography here at Manchester, founder of the Centre for Urban Policy Studies, which is now the Spatial Policy Analysis Lab, led by Cecilia, among other people. Brian was a leading person in the geographical discipline throughout the 70s, serving as president of the Institute of British Geographers. And he was probably best known as an advisor to government, where he contributed to a number of policy initiatives around planning, human geography, and public policy. He was a fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences and the Royal Society of Arts, and he was appointed a lifetime honorary member of the Royal Town Planning Institute. And this lecture is given every year in memory of Brian's work. Turning now to our speaker for this year's lecture, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Professor John Goddard. Thank you for joining us, John. John's an Emeritus Professor at Newcastle University, where he founded and led the Centre for Urban and Regional Development Studies in the late 70s, ran that for 20 years. He was appointed Deputy Vice-Chancellor, again at Newcastle, with responsibility for city and regional engagement. And his work straddles the academic and policy fields of city and regional development, higher education, and research and innovation. And John has led work for the OECD, the European Commission on this topic. He's also written a series of extremely influential books that have really defined this field of study, including, among others, The University and the City with Paul Vallance, The Civic University, and this work informed the establishment of the UK Civic University Commission, which John worked Vice Chair, and the resulting Civic University Network. John's been awarded the Victoria Medal of the Royal Geographical Society and the Peter Hall Award of the Regional Studies Association, and in 2012 was awarded the Lord Deering Lifetime Achievement Award for Higher Education. John's work has been prescient in many ways. Universities have become increasingly focused on how they generate real-world impact, how they can better contribute to their city regions. For myself, engaged in sustainable cities research, John's framing of this agenda certainly helped me think more deeply about how universities can and should work with cities. In the faculty here, we've got a long and proud history of working with our city region to help it thrive. And John's visit also followed only a month after our university launched its new 2035 strategy, which, among many other things, foregrounds a commitment to redefining ourselves as a great civic university of the 21st century. John also visits us at a time when universities are at an interesting moment, under pressure in many ways, to rethink what we do and how we do it. So I know I speak for all my colleagues when I say we're delighted to have you here today to talk to us on such a relevant and important topic. I think we've got until about 6:15, so there should be time for some questions afterwards. And I'm now going to try and switch to your presentation.
A little funny thing there. Find the little button. That one. That's one. That's it.
Over to you, John.
Thanks very much indeed. Well, just to say, as part of my title, Special Advisor to the National Civic Impact Accelerator Programme, and just because of that, I've distributed this leaflet, which is something that was put together for the Labour Party conference, where Manchester University had a session, but there was a whole session on on civic universities at the Labour Party conference. So we had some spare copies, so you're welcome to take them away. I'm not specifically going to talk about that, but I thought you might be interested. Just by introduction, I'm really a great admirer of Brian Robson. So I'm really honoured to be asked to give this lecture. Special thanks to Cecilia for nominating me. Cecilia was a researcher in CURS, Centre for Urban Regional Development Studies in Newcastle, which I founded in '77 and there for 20 years. CURS was won successive rounds of funding from the ESRC, and who was the person who reviewed it and really helped us get through all the review process? None other than Brian Robson. So Brian Robson was very much a peer of what we were doing when he was chair of the Geography Committee on the ESRC. I'm working on my autobiography, and I've realised that Brian, this is a leaflet from my autobiography. As I was been writing on that and then looked at Brian's career trajectory as an urban geographer, working with the ESRC, and subsequently applying his experience and leadership role in this university, very similar to my own, is someone who's gone from studying the whole issue of city development and then coming into the university world and applying the knowledge to a leadership role in the institution. We followed both the same trajectory. So I did all the things that we just heard from Brian. I was Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences in Newcastle. I was asked to be a new VC in 2001 to become his deputy and translate the work that we've been doing academically in CURDS on research and innovation and territorial development into practice, and join him in a process of the re-engagement of the university in the city and region. And I'll go on to show that many big civic universities actually during the late 1990s have basically turned their back on the cities. Brian took up his post in Manchester in 1977, as we heard, established the Centre for Urban Policy Studies in 1983, was the head of geography, faculty dean and PVC for external engagement. So it's quite remarkable, the parallels between our two careers. And I think one of the keys to it is that we both got gongs, by the way, so Royal Geographical Society, etc. But I think the key to a lot of all this was we had long periods of service in one institution, in one city outside of London. There's been such a churn in the academy that the length, being in one place, in one institution, is quite important. And indeed, my mentor, when I was at the LSE, was a renowned Swedish geographer called Torsten Hägerstrand. And he told me when I was thinking about moving to Newcastle from LSE, he said it would be a good move if I wanted to make a difference to society. He told me that in London, there was, and here I quote, an excess of worthwhile combinations. If you wanted to make a difference, how right he was. You know, if you want to get things done, you can't get them done in London. You have to be somewhere else. Alan and I were talking about this earlier. And like Brian, higher education was not my academic background. We both learned about the HE on the job as we endeavoured to bridge two very different academic and policy traditions, indeed silos, one where the object of study and target policy was places, and the other with the universities and institutions. They were very two distinct academic worlds, two distinct policy worlds. And it was a world in which universities were unfathomable black boxes to local authorities, and university leaders had no understanding or interest or how the city functions. So you had these two worlds just passing each other like ships in the night. But it wasn't always like this. Going back to the 19th century, we saw the emergence of locally endowed proto-universities in growing cities like Newcastle, Sheffield, Manchester and Birmingham. They used applied sciences to support mining, manufacturing, medical science to help create a healthy workforce, and very important point, they sought to stimulate civic life through public discourse on the future of science and society at large. So the city was a place where there was discussion about life and society in the future. So that was quite important. And in the 20th century, these so-called red brick universities became less engaged with their places as central government became more directly involved, providing funding by the University Grants Committee. The government-driven expansion of the university system in the 1960s through the founding of new universities was largely outside of cities, places like Warwick, Brighton, Norwich. But the big cities which were being neglected had major problems. So the whole expansion of the university system was outside the big cities where they could have made a big difference. Then we had the Blair expansions in the 1970s to meet his target of 50% of young people going on to higher education. This was totally unplanned in geographical terms. The universities popped up everywhere. When anyone had an offer, they paid a bid, and you've got a university all over the place. There was no planning at all about it. And throughout this period, also, the governance of the UK became increasingly centralised, and the powers and resources of local government were slowly emasculated. Okay, now let's get into the grip. That's sort of the background. In Newcastle, we challenged this. And then when I retired in 2008, the CEO of Nesta Foundation, the National Endowment for Science, Technology and Art, Jeff Mulligan, who some of you will know, invited me to become a Nesta Fellow and write what he wanted me to write, a provocation called Reinventing the Civic University. That was what he asked me to write about. And I did that, and what I want to do tonight is roll forward the ideas in that publication to the very different economic and political environment in which we're operating now, and in which the archetypal civic universities are operating in core cities outside London. So that's really what I do. And I will draw on the report of the Civic University Commission, which has an interesting title, Truly Civic, Strengthen the Connection Between Universities and Their Places. And out of that was established the follow-on network. In all of this, I must acknowledge the role of the late Lord Bob Kerslake, who, as a civil servant, a public figure, joined up the worlds of local government and higher education in successive roles as Chief Executive of Sheffield City Council, Permanent Secretary of what is now the Department of Communities, Housing and Local Government, Head of the Home Civil Service, and then lastly, Chair of Governors of Sheffield Hallam University. And on the basis of that, he took on the role of being Chair of the Civic University Commission, and I was appointed his deputy. It's worth noting that the Civic University Commission was not a government commission. It was sponsored by a charitable foundation linked to the business of providing student housing. So I'm not going to talk about student housing, but there really is quite an interesting issue that really this foundation funded the Civic University Commission. I would go on to suggest how the ties and accountability of the great civic universities to their communities have been diluted because of the funding regimes and related competitive pressures driving up the need to raise national and international profiles, research reputations, and attractiveness to overseas students. Indeed, the imperative of civic engagement highlighted by the Civic University Commission have had to work against the market pressures driving all universities and making the journey to being truly civic very challenging. So I want to conclude by recognising the policy landscape is changing, with the UK Secretary of State for Education proposing in a letter to Vice-Chancellors that universities play a greater civic role in their communities. I am clear that the government will want it to form a core part of the renewed vision of the sector. That was sent out in 2024, in November 2024. This is also an issue in which we are in a situation we're mayoral combined authorities, and so the issue is the opportunities associated with that statement and more authority being devolved to mayoral authorities. And so it requires a new, my highline point in a sense, is to require bottom-up as well as top-down change. For university, a collaborative mindset which is at odds with a prevailing attitudes in the sector and practices. For policymakers across Whitehall, silos, there is a clear incentive structure to collectively support Civic University's mission. Going forward, I anticipate that the coincidence of multiple crises around the world, and particularly populism, which has its roots in left-behind places, will have far-reaching implications that universities cannot ignore. Indeed, I would argue is that they do not step up to the plate and assert their civic role as anchor institutions in their places, the very existence of some universities may be at stake. I do not hesitate. If you look at the United States, there is a real danger that if we're complacent in the university sector, we're going to find the plug pulled on us in potentially a coalition with reform in leading this country. Don't underestimate it. Don't underestimate it. There are real serious effects, and I can tell you that from practical experience and what's going on in places where reform are taking over local government. So let's get down off to the politics and get into the nitty-gritty of thinking about this. And so I'll go back to my opening remarks about the different knowledge domains that Brian and I both inhabited. There are two distinct fields, and I've learned to bridge them by iterating between thought and policy and practice. I want to emphasize that because I think the thing that both Brian and I did, we just didn't write about things, we wrote about things and we did them. And that might seem a stupid thing to say, but so much of the academy is about writing things, about not doing things. You have to do things. And what many of us have been trying to do is move backwards and forwards between the world of thought and practice. And this is a Mickey Mouse side, but you can get the domains, focus on the university institution, rankings of the universities, territorial development. These two chatting. After I retired, and with support of the Leverhulme Foundation grant and Emeritus professorships, I reflect on the role of universities in two publications, which is already referred to. Looking at the university from outside the university and the city. It's important here because it addresses big challenges. I do think it's important to understand these are big challenges now. Environmental sustaining, health and cultural development. Those are a long, big, and we have a series of case studies looking at how universities were involved on these themes. One of my chapters is about Manchester and the development of environmental issues, the Oxford Road and all the rest of it. So that's a long time ago. And you've got now a new big centre on this process. But anyway, there's a chapter in my book about the university and sustainability in 2013. And then the next book was looking outwards from the university to society. That was outside in and an inside out perspective. And that's what we did in the second book. Which was on the focus of the what and how of civic engagement, particularly the vision, mission, leadership, management and governance and all. How do you organise all this? How do you manage your resources and students to fulfil a role in your communities? There are two related points emerging from these two books. One is relatively uncontroversial and the other normative and aspirational. What should we be doing as opposed to what we are doing? First point, across the globe, places, towns and cities where people live and work have been, are and will be in the future, I talk about the future, on the front line of global economic, political, social and environmental change. That's obvious, I guess, for most of this audience, but it isn't always obvious to people who field is higher education. Second, universities should have a key role to play in meeting the challenges of multiple global crises through their teaching and research, and acting, as I've already said, as anchor institution. The key word about anchoring is tying down the global in the local. There's all these big global pressures and events. Look at the Sustainable Development Goals. They are placed for, they're all, most of them, places mentioned. This means that they need to help and be seen to help their places actively navigate an increasingly turbulent world. Part of the solution and not part of the problem of global institutions that many have seen and contributed to the economic and social and political environment we face now. In other words, say that again, not just reading my text, there is a perception that universities are associated with globalization and broadly populism doesn't like global mobility. So we're seen to be part of that whole process, which is going down like a lead balloon with the populist right. So that's really, so I must mention in all of that, I've talked about past, present, and future. Actors and agents in this space need to understand the evolution of universities and the evolution of their places. History and geography. I did a joint degree in history and geography. Matter. We must share the accumulated wisdom of the academy to avoid the continual reinvention of the wheel by new generations of policy wonks. I've been seeing this all the time now dealing with Whitehall about what's going on at the present time. Complete, absolute lot of knowledge of what's been happening. They keep on reinventing the same stuff. And there's a huge body of knowledge out there which we're not getting across to them. Maybe some big think tanks are, but broadly speaking, in my space, it's not been happening. And so really, Google search is not enough. You know, people they can Google search something, they can find out it. And this is where the combination of the leadership of institution and of places, territorial governments to use the jargon, is critically important. Or more colloquially, our VCs, presidents in your case, and mayors, as well as academics, administrators, business leaders, and above all, citizens, have to work together to prevent community breakdown. This is a really important issue. We are facing fragmentation, and universities could be playing a key role in putting the bits together again. If there is one driver that connects the various crises, it's a backlash against free markets and globalization. This has multiple epicenters in left-behind places. It's where universities can be seen as being driven solely by the academic market, or put another way, as globally connected but locally disengaged. I've said that already. We all know universities are not place-bound. The very essence of a university is that it is involved in the creation of knowledge, chiefly through research, and the universal sharing of that knowledge, particularly through teaching, and where reach is not necessarily limited by time and space. Also, and this is a very important point, citizenship is not necessarily only about citizens of a place. We are all citizens of the world. So this whole global local and how we conceptualize global and local, and citizenship is a very interesting way into that. But it also raises questions of how we in the academy are accountable for our actions as citizens of place. My VC I work with, Chris Brink, used to go around to departments, and he used to go when we were doing reviews of the departments, he used to say, what does it mean to you, Dr. X, Professor Y, to be a citizen of Newcastle? Huh? it just didn't register. People never thought about it. They happened to be in the university, and they might be living it, but they didn't see themselves in any way in their academic role having to do with the city. In most democracies, this accountability takes the form of political and electoral processes. These processes are very much place-bound. Universities don't have defined geographies, but you have geographical administrations, local authorities. So politicians in national and local government across the world are saying, we have a university in our town or city, but what are its obligations to us? What are its obligations to us? And that raises a very important issue about the notion of anchor institutions. This idea of anchor institutions is what often comes up. People say we are anchor institutions. That's the part of the puff that goes on in political discourses. And this is a quote from the Work Foundation, written by Will Hutton. Many of you will know. And this is an interesting anchor institutions. I will read. Are likely locally embedded institutions, typically non-governmental, public sector, cultural, or other civic institutions, are of significant importance to the economy and, very important, the wider community life of the city in which they are based. They generate positive externalities and relationships that can support or anchor global economic activity in the locality. Anchor institutions do not have a democratic mandate, and their primary missions do not involve regeneration or local economic limits. Nevertheless, their scale, local rootedness and community links are such that they can play a key role in local development and economic growth, representing the sticky capital around economic growth strategies can be built. They are institutions of the city and not just in the city. So that made people use this terminology without actually thinking about what it means. But what about the civic university? Where does that fit? And what does this imply for universities? It implies, and this is in my other book on the civic university, relationships with other institutions that inhabit the place. Whether it's the NHS, business, further education colleges. This is a key one. Normative questions about the need for academic practice, teaching and research to be of relevance to the place in which practitioners live and work as citizens. Thirdly, exploration of a more broadly conceived territorial development approach than just economic growth and competitiveness, which is so much of what it's about at the present time. Interrelated physical, social and cultural dimensions. You cannot ignore the physical infra, the footprint of the campus, buildings, theatres, everything that goes with the built form of the city. Buildings do matter in places. So we came up and developed this idea of the civic university, and when we contrast it with the traditional university. In the traditional university, you have three separate, you have teaching and research, and sometimes called a third mission. And the fact that it's called third means it's inferior. It's not part of the core mission of the institution. So that is a traditional university. The focus of management and leadership is on, in these terms, rankings, teaching satisfaction scores, excellence rankings in research, and the third mission is making extra money. Commercialization, spin out, and all the rest of it. That's the classic traditional university. And there's a hard boundary between the university and the outside world. And often it's physically buildings. You keep the students, keep the public people out, basically. So that's the traditional civic university. And so you have a core and a periphery. So that is what many traditional universities look like, and still do. So we came out there, and that has implications for territorial development. There's a quick slide about that. Higher education is in the region, but not of it. Policies and practice in discouraging government, the focus on academic laws for your teaching research. And then you have a problem in the public sector of being disintegrated, a lack of political leadership, private sector not working together. This is from another paper we wrote. The critical thing was no boundary spanners, no people connecting it all up. Focus on the supply side, transactional interventions, not transformational change, ineffective or non-existing partnerships, lack of shared understanding about the challenge, entrepreneurs locked out of regional planning. Let me go on to look at the civic university. This is the alternative, normal, where engagement still exists as a pillar, but it's many of the activities which are in the previous slide. Let's go back a bit. All of these things outside, they're odd projects. They get started, they end, and they disappear. There's a collection of all these lots of little projects, but no coherence of integration of them all. So in the civic university, those little blobs, those outside things come embedded in teaching and research. Teaching enhances research, widening participation in community work, all coming together, and an emphasis on transformative and responsive demand-led action is what should characterize the civic university, and a soft boundary between the inside, between the academy and society. So that's the model that we posited in the book on the civic university, and informed a lot of the thinking that went on to the civic university commission, I'm going to talk about in a minute. It's a normative model on which puts conflicting demands on university leaders. Their issues have to only excellent in terms of conventional academic criteria, but also seeking to contribute to the public good. While responsibility to society is not new, it's been given greater saliency as the challenges we face heighten in intensity. This responsibility has to be balanced against the challenge of participating in a global higher education marketplace with its own internal logic in terms of competition for mobile students and academic life. So it's how you combine being locally rooted and dealing with the global world in which we're going to operate. And this requires managing the tension between the demands from within higher and outside higher education, including embedding external engagement into the process of teaching and research. It also requires managing conflicting signals to the extent that the policy environment, not least in terms of the degree of focus on national government on, basically speaking, we want great universities who will enable us to compete in the world. That is still the underlying dialogue that's in government. We have to deal with. And I will make a final point here, which is this bottom pillar engagement. Not all universities, well, we do this already as part of our teaching research. We don't need this third pillar. You do need that third pillar because you need capacity to build capacity. You need to be able to work with the mayor's offices, to work with the community and voluntary sector, and you need buildings. You do need a separate stream of funding to do that. It's not just good enough to embed it into teaching research. And so in our book, we identify 7 dimensions of the civic university: a sense of purpose, active engagement, holistic approach, sense of place, a willing to invest, transparency and accountability, and innovative methodologies to do all that stuff. And the key point about it all is, and this is what we've been trying to do in the Civic University network, is see it as a journey. You know, it's universities, particularly who were in that first tradition. How do you move along this spectrum into becoming a civic engagement is embedded in everything you do? And we come up with this idea. This, in fact, we have to accept this. This is a normative, not a description of what goes on. It's a description of what should go on in terms of contribution to the public good. It's not new, and it's a lot of things that have to be worked through. I've already more or less said that in my text. And the public role has to be asserted through a set of top-down design principles matched by an intentionally wide scope of bottom-up creativity and entrepreneurship from the faculty and non-academic staff. It's very difficult to do. It's a very complicated process of management, all of this stuff. It isn't a straight linear process. It's experiment, it's changing, and you have to try and connect all these things and require innovative organizational structures, programs, and very complication. It's not a straightforward thing. I'm waffling on, but anyway, we did all this work, and then it was basically taken up by the Civic University Commission, and that's its title, Strengthening the University and its places. And we investigated how far universities were living up to these societal, this idealized model. We found a lack of local accountability as we went around the UK. There was an ignorance of local people about the contribution universities make to their community, especially amongst the less advantaged. Many felt that income from fees should be used for individual student benefit and not the general public. The classic thing was we did some interviews, I think it was in Nottingham, in a disadvantaged community, and some woman jumped up and said, we're paying for what it was for these fees, £1,000, what it was at the time, and I want all that money to go on Johnny. I don't want it to go on other people who don't go to the university. There's a view that fees should be for the benefit only of the students who are attending the university. They shouldn't be wasted on the general public. That really struck me. And then we also found that individual central government departments are independently funding university work, each with different expected outputs. For example, some parts of government want a business startup, others are concerned with public health. There was no cross-government view as to the role of universities and the future development places around. It was just not there. Government was in silos. The Commission recommended to get round that university that aspired to be civic institutions should prepare civic university agreements, co-created and signed with other partners. And this is what was in the idea of the Civic University Agreement. Civic University should shrine their analysis and strategy in a Civic University Agreement, co-created and signed by other key partners. And I gather Manchester's just done a new one. And that involved understanding local populations and asking them what they want, understanding themselves, hold a mirror up to yourself, earlier slide, working with other local institutions, business and community organisations to agree where the short, medium and long-term opportunities lie in a given area. A clear set of priorities, and the output of this all should be a strategic analysis, local engagement and a clear plan of action, including how you're going to fund this. And so a number of universities, after the commission was published, signed a civic pledge. It's all published. And this is what the pledge was. As a place-based institution, we are committed to attaching a high priority to the economic, social, environment, and cultural life of our communities. Our civic role will be informed by evidence-based analysis of the needs of our place. So many of the people here are doing analytical work, actually going into informing your civic university agreement. Developed collaboratively with local partners and informed by the voice. So it's a co-creation, getting the evidence, not just going out and doing some surveys, but actually working with the community and business in the development of the plan. We will collaborate with other universities and other anchor institutions and form partnerships to overcome the challenges facing our local communities. With our partners, we will be clear about what we do and how we measure it, so we can say with confidence that we have achieved it and how we might do better in the future. So that was a key part of the recommendation. And how do universities need to be changed? I'm not going to read all this slide, but clearly there's a lot of change required if you're going to seriously take this process forward. And that isn't easy. Let me try and pick out some. Key to some of that is there is to be a connection between, I'll summarise, I won't read it. Basically, what you do need is someone at the executive board level that has responsibility for the civic role of the university, sits on the executive board. They don't, but then they have to deal with the struggles of dealing with the silos, which are down the faculties and the disciplines. How do you put something together which is cross-cutting with institutions, particularly research institutes in the university, that are organised in, broadly speaking, different silos? And the key role to that is a term which is now widely used in the higher education literature, is called blended professionals in finance, estates and communications, working with a research hub connected to the global discourse on universities and place and like-minded institutions. So in Newcastle, we now have Insights North East, which works and supports the Pro-Vice Chancellor for Engagement and Place, doing a whole range of research and analysis, drawing people from all over the university, different disciplines, not just in curves and geography, to work and inform the policies and practices at the executive board level. And although currently there's something, in effect, it's the old, you have to do this in partnership as a living laboratory. And so then out of the Civic University Commission, we created the Civic University Network, which is based at Shepherd Hallam University, a national network of universities committed to transforming lives and places. And the key thing about this, the Civic University Network, there isn't a one-size-fits-all. It is very different in different places, but you can learn from other places. So what we've done in the Civic University is create a learning network, how bunches of universities are learning from each other about how to do this difficult process of working with their communities. Now, the high hopes, the title of my lecture. We've been working on this in the Civic University Network now for 3.5 years, 4 years nearly. And we were absolutely delighted in November last year when the Secretary of State for Education wrote to all Vice-Chancellors with this statement. Universities should play a greater civic role in their communities. Our higher education providers already play a vital role in their communities and regions as employers, skill providers, researchers. And I want to build on this and ensure that you play a full part both in civic engagement, ensuring local communities and business benefit from your work, and in regional development, working in partnership with local government to shape and deliver the economic and social changes needed. The civic must be locally led, and you will each have distinct and different roles. I didn't write this, but it's exactly what we've got it across the government. They really understand what we're about. But, and we're coming on to the but. The hard reality. There's no statutory duty on universities to collaborate with their local communities or on earmark funding to support it. Universities are currently facing financial precarity, putting pressure on them to look inwards, to compete for dwindling resources and funding, to get student numbers from other universities nearby, to screw up to screw the neighbouring post-92 university. So it is a dog-eat-dog out there world at the present time. And it's particularly driven by the act which this government is not repealing, the Conservative Act, Joe Johnson's Act, Boris's brother, 2000 Higher Education and Research Act, it regulated competition, capped fees, they've gone up a little bit now, and basically create a free market for international, largely postgraduate students. And then we reinforce the importance of the REF system, single discipline, academic discipline, based on academic peer review, used by the media to create global rankings of universities in that disregard place. That still applies, and the government has resolutely said they're not going to repeal it, because they do like this whole idea of a hierarchy. That's why lots of money is getting pumped into Oxford and Cambridge and the Oxford and Cambridge corridor as part of this whole idea. Elite universities competing in the global stage is still very much part of the agenda. We've had a white paper on higher education. It's just been released. I'm spending a lot of time dealing with all this all hours, night and day. In this, it's not a higher education white paper, it's a skills white paper. There's references to the need for interdepartmental working on the skills agenda, but not a single reference in the white paper to the Ministry of Housing, Local Government and Communities, and there's a limited concern for place in that whole white paper. The exception, this is an important exception, there is support for triple helix partnerships and putative business clusters, but with no regard to citizen participation in quadruple helix partnership. The white paper is being driven insofar as resources are going in, they're coming from UKRI and Research and Innovation. And you may have noticed a big slug of money being given to a selection of universities, which don't include Manchester actually, for core funding for science excellence. And yet I know, and we all know, that in a digital economy, much of our local economy is in the professional and public services, and the link between research and innovation can no longer be seen as a linear process. Users and citizens need to be involved in that. And so what I read into this white paper is an attempt, and there's lots of other things around it. Mrs. Thatcher tried to create a classification of universities, research universities, teaching universities, and the combined research combination, RXT. Basically, and there's things in the white paper, and I've got all this in a text, I won't read it out, that I can quote you stuff, where basically they're now trying to reassert strengthen the hierarchy. They talk about university specialisation in key local sectors, but it's nothing to do with economic development and community development. So the logic of marketisation means winners and losers. Potential university closures and mergers with little regard for their civic role. And that is going on right now. The big merger, Dundee University nearly did go bust, and they've been bailed out. There are now 50 universities in the list of OFS that are in the red, and potentially in the next 2 years are going to go bust. 50 from the OFS. And the OFS is no responsibility in the white paper. It's concerned what's happened, and this is it's known amongst the chattering classes, that the government has hired a number of big consultancy practices to advise on a case-by-case on the mergers of universities and their closure. One of them is a consultancy practice that has links with this university. And so they've got some big consult. So they're doing the rationalisation with no plan, no attempt to meet what was in that letter from the Secretary of State. So that's going on. And OFS, obviously the students, as responsible for monitoring the financial health of the university insofar as it has an impact on the student experience, but there's no specific geographical dimension to the Office of Students' Responsibilities. But mergers and takeovers will have a profound effect on students if it happens. How are you going to handle it? The student's going to move around, so there's a really completely place-blind aspect. And this got me. This is the Global Talent Fund, which you haven't got anything of, but it's been allocated. This is the state from Lord Dallas. Literally, it came out 2 days ago, released by the UK. Genius is not bound by geography, But the UK is one of the few places blessed with the infrastructure, skills-based, world-class industry and international ties need to incubate brilliant ideas and turn them into new medicines that save new lives, new products that make our lives easier and even entirely new jobs. Bringing these innovations right here in Britain would be critical to delivering the government's. So the words are there, but place doesn't matter. That's the line. Place doesn't matter. Well, it does matter. So I'm passionate about that. And I love this quote. It's an old piece of work that was done by if the European Commission 2015. It's basically a critique of the linear model. So much of the thinking in DSIP is you do the science, you push it out, it gets picked, you spit it out, you get new business created, and there's no notion of how the innovation process. It's research and development, isn't necessarily innovation. And I will read this quote. I'll just go to the end of it. When he says, it's complicated, it happens in complex ecosystem, blah, blah, blah. And we miss out on the pipeline, we miss that we need more open collaboration globally and locally between citizens, governments, and inventors at home. Focus on people, places, and processes. Europe needs better assets as well as a broader vision. We have to get back to basics. Upskilling Europe's people using local strengths to underpin local innovation and to transforming public processes. I love this one. Our innovation economy is not a Roman aqueduct, but a muddy pond. It requires all actors, corporate and academic and civil, to work together. So that's really, okay. Now let's go to the bit of policies. So that is the context, but on the other hand, now this is the crossroads bits of my talk, there is a huge opportunity through devolution. And how are we going to make the most of it? Alan and I were talking a bit about this before with coffee. This is the government white paper. Aims to widen and deepen devolution across England, providing mayors with unprecedented powers and funding and hardwire them into the way government works, and to reset the relationship between central and local government and give communities stronger tools to shape the future of their local areas, while improving accountability and building capacity across the local government. So it's an opportunity for all parts of government to recognise that universities working with their local communities is not only beneficial to the universities, but to society at large. But there's no reference in the devolution white paper to higher education. So what I'm proposing, what I've been discussing with Cross Whitehall, we had a big policy forum recently on this, what structures do we need to be put in place inside and outside of universities to facilitate joint working between universities and mayoral combined authorities? How should universities be included in upcoming devolution deals? How might these differ between MCAs at different stages of development and different levels of prosperity? How should universities link their work with business, with the community and the priorities for inclusive growth and with the industrial strategy white paper? How should combined authorities work with different universities and colleges in their area to meet the skills gaps? And how can areas without MCA combined authorities work with universities to deliver an equivalent outcome? Those are the conversations I am trying to have at the moment with other colleagues across Whitehall, and I'll answer my armpits there. This is all important because of some work I heard about at the wonky Higher Education Policy Conference, the Festival of Higher Education in Senate House in London last week. It's about the reputation of the strategy of higher education, developing a new vision. It's very interesting. It's been done by our trade union in the UK in conjunction with a global consultancy called Stonehaven. There's lots of big players out here. They've just taken over Public First, who work with the, you really have to understand the power policies of the knowledge economy, who the people, and Stonehaven are very clear. They just acquired Public First. And at the wonky conference, it's amazing. It's higher education conference. All these private sector organisations were pitching in for business, basically, because they know we're a big user of consultancy services. And this is a slide that came from that event. They went out and did lots of focus groups, basically, around the country about accountability, civic pride, and these are just some of the quotes from the work that Public First did. Students can't even, I'll just leave it on the screen and you can read it. And you can see how this prays to reform. These are not my slides, so. So they classified these into groups of people in their fieldwork: vocationalists, stalled skeptics, change agents, and champions. And there were people who saw that really it was all about vocation. You need to develop the skill. It was a skills agenda, basically. And then there were stalled skeptics. And then there were those people who said, yes, we can change the world in universities. And then there were champions. And they classified, they had a big sample of lots of interviews. It's opinion research, basically. And what they suggested, that we'd gone through a series of stages, and you can recognize all of these people here. And they came up with this idea in this work, which is, it hasn't been seen other than this higher education conference. So you're seeing these things first time outside the UK. And effective strategy must anticipate, adapt to coming disruptions, including AI, demographic change, and evolving skills needs. Has to meet the moment many times before. Very interesting. The Deering report in 1997. That's when I started doing universities and communities. We wrote a report for the Deering Commission on universities and communities. And in the Deering report, there's a really very clear line talking about the compact between universities and places. He was fantastic. He was a bit like Bob Kerslake, actually. And the role of the university is to build the political momentum, public support, and will to drive positive reputation and go such a settlement with the next government. So what's going on at the moment is this: there's a lot going on about trying to get a better settlement for the future to enable civic stuff to go on. And so this is the strategy that's going on in UK, and this is the plan of action. I'm involved with all of this, and then develop the case to basically see off reform, because if they, and it's really very interesting. And accountability is the key to it, because we have accountability vertically to different parts of government. You get money from different parts of government. You have a vertical accountability, but no lateral accountability to place. We have no. And there's a very interesting report, really, I've got 1 or 2 quotes on it, just produced by the Post-18 Project. Very, very interesting, which sets out a whole set of issues about accountability. And I'll just quote from this report. It's called the Post-18 Report, and it's still in the lecture, which I think is going to be published. Universities are quasi-public organisation serving multiple constituencies with complex accountability relations, where organisations receive public funding or subsidy and exercise public powers. They require public legitimacy in which autonomy is appropriately balanced with accountability. And so most university governing bodies do have, they're run by the executive. The governors of universities don't really intervene much. They're puppets of the executive, and they have nominal people locally, largely from business, not much community representation, and lower levels of governance in the university. There are very few outside voice. Our governance structures are all inward looking. They are not plugged into the outside world. So that's there's a lot of quotes about this, but it's the point about accountability. It is absolutely critical. I'm running out of time. So here's the crop. So this is summing up again, basically what I've said already. Specifically in terms of anti-education, roots in left-behind places in universities and north of the pale. They do not step up to the plate and assert their roles, anchor institutions in their places, and push back on the narrative of university being inaccessible ivory tower. They're very accessible. Some of our universities may be a state in an uncertain landscape. And this is what I'm recommending. We need a statutory duty on universities to work together in a place with local government, business in the community, and voluntary sectors in a long-term contract with desired outcomes. Universities receive many place-blind streams of funding from across Whitehall. These funds could be matched by mayoral combined authorities using their powers to create a single funding pot along similar lines as those once held by the RDAs. Universities accessing this pot to help them contribute to the well-being of social and cultural infrastructure. There's some very important work being done by the British Academy on social and community infrastructure. They are a very powerful, not many people are aware, the British Academy is directly funded by the Treasury. And they're doing this work on social and community infrastructure. And they've now woken up that universities are important to the community infrastructure of places, alongside a whole range of other institutions. You can find they're important. And so what we're working on now is creating a new movement, Civic University Movement 2.0, where we realise that there's not a one-size-fits-all here. We want to have regional associations university in guiding the rationalisation of the sector. So there are regional associations. We have one in the North East. There's one in Yorkshire and Humberside. And I think there's some association in Greater Manchester. I'm not entirely sure whether you're working together or competing. And working together what is key to it. And we need to keep that conversation going. And we need to ensure that there is the practical experience. There's a huge body of knowledge out there. We need an online forum of policymakers and practice in the worlds of higher education, research and television. And we above all need a panel of experts. So what I'm working on now is finding a bunch of people who are academics and practitioners to work with a new network of universities. And I'm trying to get, I'm working night and day trying to get it all together and get some funding for it. We might be successful. So that's enough about what I'm up to, and I hope to get some recruits from Manchester for this agenda. And if you want to follow up what I'm doing, you can scan that. This is a provocation I've just done, covering some of the proposals that I've just read out to you. And very importantly, and just final, these are live links. There is an ongoing inquiry of the Select Committee of Education Committee in Whitehall about the closure of universities. It's actually sitting now collecting evidence about the rationalisation of the sector. And we've produced, the NCIA have both given oral evidence and we've written a long summary of what we found out in that other, that's a live link, that one, about what the issues are. So it's everything to pay for, and I'm really delighted and hope we can get some Manchester support behind it. Thank you very much indeed.